A man collapsed on a deserted train platform. No one stepped forward, except for an elderly night watchman with silver hair. He didn't ask for a name, didn't call for help. He simply knelt down and whispered, "I'll hold on to you." He didn't know he had just saved Chuck Norris, and he had no idea that 5 words would quietly set an entire system in motion and change his life forever. When winter touches Montana, it never gives warning. Not with the first chill wind nor the scent of wood burning in a stove. It arrives with silence, a thick, complete stillness, as if the whole mountain range hushes to listen to its own breath. And in the small town of Elkhorn, where snow-covered roads bore only the prints of stray cats and old sleds, there was one man who stayed awake through every night. His name was Alan Reyes, 58, tall and gaunt, with shadowed eyes and hands that still instinctively washed clean, even though no surgeries awaited him anymore. He had once been a top-tier ER doctor, one of the best. At one of Denver's largest hospitals, he had worked beneath surgical lights, coordinated trauma teams through a dozen emergencies a night. He was once called the man who pulled others back from the edge of death. And then he was fired. Just like that. One email, short, cold, formal. A fatality tied to administrative oversight. A patient without insurance wasn't admitted quickly enough. A system failure. But the media needed a face, and Alan Reyes, with nearly 3 decades of experience, had a name big enough to shield a scandal. No debates, no appeals. Just a Monday afternoon when he walked out of the conference room with no access to the hospital's system. His keycard was disabled in under an hour. He packed his things, left behind his locker, and caught the first northbound bus, not to find work, but to disappear. Alan came to Elkhorn not for a reason, but because no one there asked too many questions. The town had a rickety train station, a 24-hour diner, and a night shift at the station, where only 2 trains passed each day. He applied for the night watchman job. One no one wanted, check doors, sweep the platform, refill vending machines, and wait in a small room with a heater that wheezed like it was breathing. No one knew he had been a doctor. On the application he simply wrote, education, college, experience, shift supervisor. He didn't lie, but he didn't tell the whole truth either. Sometimes, silence is the last defense of someone who used to be somebody. On his first night, he brought an old notepad, the kind doctors used during rounds. Now he used it to log train schedules and note the types of people who passed through. An elderly woman from Missoula, a young drifter from Idaho, a girl who cried alone for 2 hours, then vanished without a word. Alan didn't intervene, he just watched and remembered. The night room where he sat wasn't much bigger than the ER cubicle he once worked in. An old swivel chair, an automatic coffee machine, and a vintage radio that sometimes caught weather station broadcasts. When snow fell heavily, sound was muffled to a hush, only the wind pressing through cracks, brushing calloused fingers that hadn't fully healed. Alan had grown so used to the silence that he no longer feared it. For years he'd lived in noise, ambulance sirens, running footsteps, constant beep 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 of heart monitors. Now, at night, he could finally hear his own heart. Sometimes he wrote a few lines, not for anyone, not to post, just to hold on to himself. What I fear most isn't making mistakes, but being forgotten by those who once trusted me. One night, around 3 a.m., the station was lit only by dim, yellow fluorescence. Light snow was falling. Alan poured his 3rd cup of coffee. As he checked the breaker panel outside, he saw a man stumbling from the last car of the train from Seattle. The man was tall, in a long coat, hat pulled low. His walk was stiff and unsteady, like someone coming off a long flight or a deep exhaustion. He tried to keep walking, but collapsed 10 steps from the station doors. Alan didn't shout. He didn't ask. He just ran. Instinct switched on like a circuit. He knelt beside the man, checked the neck, weak pulse, shallow breath, cold skin, a small bruise on the forehead, possibly from a fall, unfocused gaze, uneven pupils. Alan guessed temporary autonomic nervous dysfunction, maybe cerebral hypoxia or a transient stroke. He had no medical tools, no stethoscope, no medication, but he had his hands and a memory forged by years of training. Alan wrapped his wool scarf as a head cushion. He took off his coat and placed it around the man's midsection, trapping warmth. Then, calmly, he called emergency services. Elkhorn Station. Male. Approxi 70. Semi-conscious. Slow pulse. Unresponsive to voice. Need assistance within 10 minutes or risk escalation. Then he kept talking to the man, without pause. I don't know who you are, but you got to stay with me, all right? I need you to stay. Keep breathing. That's it. Come on. Don't close your eyes. I see you. I'm here. Those 10 minutes lasted a year. Alan held on to that man with the same voice he once used to ground head trauma patients. No name, no ID. Didn't matter. Just one life, on cold snow. And one man, keeping it going until help arrived. When the ambulance pulled in, they didn't know who was helping. Alan stepped back, gave a quick report, then watched the man get loaded onto the stretcher. No one asked Alan's name. No one knew he had been a doctor. And he liked it that way. That night, after it was all over, Alan returned to the night room. His coffee was cold. He sat down, pulled out his notebook, and wrote one line. I couldn't save my name. But today, I saved someone's heartbeat. He closed the book, turned off the light, sank into the old chair. His chest wasn't lighter, but his heartbeat felt steadier. Outside, snow kept falling, but the night no longer felt as cold. That night, the temperature dropped to -12. The snow wasn't heavy, but soft white layers quietly blanketed the tracks, like someone had drawn a silent sheet across the station. The wind didn't howl, it breathed. Steady, gentle, as if keeping rhythm for something sleeping beneath. Alan didn't sleep. He never truly had since coming here. Still the night shift, still the fogged window in the cramped room at the end of the platform. The old electric heater clicked with a rhythm most found annoying, but to Alan, it was like the voice of an old friend. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, black, no sugar, no cream. It didn't need to taste good, it just needed to be hot so his hands wouldn't tremble in the cold. The platform was empty. The westbound train was late, the schedule blinked on the screen. Arrival delayed, expected 2:37. He checked his watch. 2:23, Idem. A crosswind swept through the corridor, carrying the metallic scent of rail steel and faint exhaust from the train's aged engine. Alan tightened his scarf, threw on an extra coat, and stepped outside. Every time a train approached, he checked the platform. No one asked him to. It was just habit. He wondered, does anyone else still do more than what the job description says? 2:37 a.m. On the dot. A long whistle echoed, layering through the mountain slopes. The train slowly crept into the station. The cars trembled lightly, like an old man walking in the snow. The headlights swept across icy patches on the ground, casting staggered beams that seemed to play tag with the shadows. Alan stepped back, coat tight around him, eyes scanning. A few passengers got off. A woman in a heavy scarf, an elderly couple, a long-tailed young man with a dusty backpack, and a tall man, unsteady on his feet. Something was off. Alan wasn't paranoid, but after thousands of ER cases he could tell. Some people didn't stumble because they were tired, but because their body was fighting to stay upright. The man wore a dark brown fur coat, a knit hat pulled over his ears. broad-shouldered, slight hunch. His left hand is holding a suitcase, and his right hand is occasionally bracing his thigh, like trying to keep balance. Just a few steps from the train car, he staggered. One arm flailed. The suitcase dropped into the snow, and then he collapsed. Suddenly, as if someone had cut the strings holding him upright. His body tipped right. His head struck the metal bench by the track. No cry, just the soft sound of someone falling, without resistance. Alan tossed his coffee into the nearest bin and ran. He knelt down, hands sweeping the snow to reach the man's neck. Weak pulse, cold skin, shallow breath, eyes darting, pale lips. Sweat pooled on the man's forehead, cold but soaked. He spoke low, steady, as he had with countless patients. "Listen to me, you're going down. But I'm here, I'm holding you, do you hear?" No answer. The man only panted. Alan checked his pupils. No constriction under the flashlight. He pulled out his phone, pressed emergency. Elkhorn Station, passenger down, suspected stroke or cerebral hypoxia, request EMT. I'm maintaining pulse. Then he removed his scarf and folded it into a pillow, took off his coat and draped it over the man's shivering body. His hand stayed at the neck, monitoring the pulse. 3 minutes passed. Alan kept talking. He didn't stop. "Stay with me. I know you hear me. Don't sleep. I'm here. Breathe slower. Count with me. 1, 2, 3. A gust sliced across the platform. Sharp as a blade, Alan's eyes blurred. He couldn't tell if it was the wind or something familiar. That face. There was something familiar. A vague memory, but Alan dismissed it. Doesn't matter. What mattered? The pulse was stabilizing. Pupils started responding. The man exhaled, a long breath, like someone just surfaced from underwater. "Good," Alan whispered. "You're coming back." The ambulance arrived at minute 9. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just headlights slicing through snowflakes like drifting stars. 2 EMTs approached, stretcher and bag in hand. Alan didn't move from his spot. He briefed them calmly, then pointed gently. Blood pressure may be low, possible hypoxia or orthostatic drop, responding well to warmth and stabilized breathing. One of them, a young man, probably new, looked at Alan, puzzled. "Are you a doctor?" Alan shook his head, calmly. "Just the night guy. I kept him breathing till you came. He's yours now." No further words, no explanations. As they lifted the stretcher into the vehicle, the man opened his eyes. Just for a moment. Just a moment. But his gaze was searching for something. Alan didn't step closer. He didn't need thanks, and he doubted the man was alert enough to remember. But in that second when their eyes met, there was a slight nod, almost subconscious. Not from a man near death, but from someone who had learned to survive in darkness. Then the doors shut. Taillights flashed and vanished around the snowy bend. The station fell silent again. Alan stood outside for a long time, the wind brushing his face like the cold hand of an old memory. He didn't go back in right away. He just bent down quietly and picked up the black leather valise the man had dropped. No name tag, no address, just a worn suitcase, scratched zipper, and a small piece of paper tied to the handle, handwritten in sloppy ink. Writ. 47th. Alan set it inside the night room. He didn't open it, didn't ask. All that night he couldn't sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, his own voice echoed in his head. "Don't sleep. I'll hold on to you." Not from fear, but because his body remembered what it feels like to hold someone's heartbeat and have the world go quiet, waiting to see what happens next. How long had it been since he last felt like himself? The next morning, Alan told no one. The station manager didn't ask, didn't know. No local news picked up the incident. A few passengers recalled someone collapsing, someone being taken away. Life went on as if nothing had happened. Snow fell again. The train schedule was refreshed. The coffee machine hissed like it always did at 2 a.m. Only Alan knew something had changed. Not because he did something heroic, but because he had been reminded he wasn't dead. Not truly. Not his instincts, not his purpose, not his quiet courage. Even if his reputation, his title, and the trust of an entire institution had once been buried beneath a personnel file. In his coat pocket, he still kept the scrap of paper from the suitcase. Grit, 47th. 3 days later, he searched it on Google. Nothing came up. Maybe it was a code, a name, or maybe it meant nothing. But deep down, Alan knew that man wasn't ordinary. Not because of how he walked, not because of how he looked, but because of the stillness people only carry when they've come back from the edge. Alan had seen it before, in surviving firefighters, in patients just pulled from death, and in himself, that first night after getting fired. He returned to his routine. Nothing changed, except for one thing. Each night, after checking the platform, he opened his old notebook. But now, instead of logging train times or bulb outages, he wrote one sentence, over and over. I still have use. As if reminding himself value doesn't vanish just because no one writes your name on the wall anymore. What Alan didn't know was that hundreds of miles away, another man was waking up. In a special medical facility, there is no nameplate, no press, and just a quiet assistant with an iPad standing nearby. The man sat up, his eyes clearer than the day before, his voice raspy but firm. "Want to meet that man?" The assistant asked gently. "Who, sir?" He answered, slowly but with certainty. "The night guard, at the station, the one who kept me alive." Then he repeated 5 words. 5 words that, when the time came, would silence the world. In a quiet recovery unit nestled behind the hills of Western Virginia, where no hospital signs stood, and only a single frosted glass window read, Section E4, Recovery Unit, Chuck Norris sat upright for the first time in 3 days. All the monitoring equipment beeped normally, heart rate steady, SEG clear. Only his eyes remained locked on something invisible in the room. He didn't remember collapsing, didn't remember the face that caught him. But one thing stayed, the voice. It wasn't loud, it didn't tremble, it didn't command. It simply repeated, evenly, rhythmically, as if it were beating in place of his failing heart. "I'm here. Breathe with me. I'll hold on to you." Chuck couldn't recall how many times he'd heard someone say, "Hang in there," but no one had ever made him believe it like that, just with their voice. That afternoon, his personal assistant, Captain Sarah Collins, formerly a military medic, entered the room with a tablet. "Mr. Norris," she said quietly, "local emergency teams confirm there's no official report filed at Elkhorn Station. The man who performed first aid didn't leave a name." Chuck nodded, his gaze didn't shift. Sarah continued. "No footage, no social media, no uploads. The person left no trace." "No need to look for a face," Chuck rasped. Sarah blinked. "Sir?" He closed his eyes for a moment, then reopened them. "I don't need a face, I need a voice." He said 5 sentences. The last one was, "I'll hold on to you." I need to find the man who's said that before. From that night on, Sarah began an audio-based search, a near-impossible mission. She contacted northern and western Montana rail stations, requesting access to audio from security cameras, even though most recordings only captured wind and background noise. She also checked staff rosters from Elkhorn. Only one name. Alan R., temporary station staff. No medical history, no military record, no media presence. She searched for that name in medical databases. No Alan Reyes is currently licensed in Montana. But one Dr. Alan R. Reyes had once been head of emergency at Denver General, suspended 3 years ago, no forwarding address. She printed the file and gave it to Chuck the next morning. Chuck read it slowly. The record said it all. Nearly 30 years in emergency medicine. Participated in humanitarian relief in war-torn Syria. Suspended over administrative liability, not malpractice. Left the field, vanished from public record. A name once held high, erased like it had never existed. Chuck set the file down. "It's him," he said quietly. "You're sure?" Sarah asked. "No, I remember," Chuck replied. "Not by face, by the way he spoke." Sarah nodded. "Should we invite him here?" Chuck shook his head. "No. Don't call, don't invite. Arrange a meeting, but don't let him know who I am. I want to know if he changes his voice when he doesn't know I'm Chuck Norris." Sarah understood. A man who saved you without knowing who you were deserves to meet you without needing to know who you are. Chuck smiled. A real one, not the kind from movies. Tired, human smile, but warm. 2 days later, a middle-aged man wearing a plain shirt and dark coat walked into Elkhorn Station carrying a camera bag. He introduced himself as an amateur photographer working on a project documenting old mountain railway stations. Alan greeted him with a nod, no questions asked. They made small talk about snow, station lights, and the station's history. Then the man asked, "Have you ever seen anything unusual here?" Alan looked directly at the camera resting on the table. "I kept someone alive once, just once, recently." The man followed up. "Do you remember what you said at the time?" Alan paused, then answered slowly, word by word. "I said, 'I'll hold on to you.' I didn't know who he was, but I couldn't let him go." The man said nothing more, just nodded, thanked him, and walked out. Outside, in a black SUV parked under the pines, Sarah was waiting. The man got in, removed his earpiece, and said exactly 5 words. "It's him, sir, no doubt." Chuck closed his eyes and let out a breath, the kind you exhale after taking a hit that almost knocks the wind out of you. 4 days later, a hand-delivered envelope arrived at Elkhorn Station. No logo, no return address. The front read, "Mr. Reyes, please spare us 15 minutes. Inside was a folded card. On the cover, a faded image of a remote mountain medical outpost. Inside, a handwritten message. "We are creating a community-first aid initiative. We need the advice of someone who once held a life in their hands, without asking a name." The bottom, an address, 50 miles out of town. No RSVP, no deadline, just an invitation, or not. Alan read the letter 3 times. The first time, it struck him as strange. The second, it made him suspicious. The third, it made his heart skip. Not because of who invited him, but because someone thought he could still help. It had been 10 years since anyone asked him that. That night, he didn't sleep. 2 days later, Alan arrived at the listed address, a small wooden house tucked in the woods. No signs, no guards, a handwritten note on the door. "Enter as someone who needs to prove nothing." He knocked gently. The door wasn't locked. Inside, simple furnishings, a tea table. Worn leather chairs, a few oil paintings were casually hung. The warmth was real, but humble. No signs of a facility. Just one man standing by the window. His back was straight, shoulders slightly sloped. The posture of someone who had worn rank but now knew humility. When Alan stepped in, the man turned around. It wasn't right away that Alan recognized him. No spotlights, no soundtrack, no movie flashbacks. Just a look. And a very gentle smile. I once said that if someone kept me alive without knowing who I was, they deserved to know who I am. Alan said nothing. His throat tightened. Chuck took one step forward. His voice didn't need to be loud, it only needed to be true. It was you. You kept me alive. I haven't forgotten. Alan bowed his head, not out of reverence, but because the integrity of the moment was too immense to face directly. After a moment he spoke. I didn't do anything beyond what a nightman should. I just didn't want to lose one more person. Chuck nodded, slowly. And that is why you're exactly the person we need. They didn't talk about injuries, or survival, or gratitude. They talked about unnamed responsibilities, the kind that move people without waiting for orders. Chuck shared about Kickstart, the center he'd spent the last decade building, teaching not just martial arts, but how to respond to the world with awareness. But I don't want instructors who can just strike. I want someone who once kept someone alive when no one else knew. Before leaving, Chuck opened a wooden cabinet and pulled out a small object. Not an award, not a certificate, just a tiny silver lapel pin, no bigger than a fingertip. Engraved on it were the words, "Stay when no one moves." Chuck didn't push it into Alan's hand. He just placed it gently. This isn't an honor, it's an invitation. You don't have to be a doctor again, but maybe help others learn how to hold on, like you once did. Alan left the cabin in silence. On the drive back, he didn't notice when the sun rose, but he remembered one thing with perfect clarity. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not because someone knew he was Dr. Ayers, but because someone knew he didn't freeze when it mattered most. Elkhorn slipped into late March, with snow melting in patches, like fading memories in the mind of the elderly. The dirty white clumps spotted the dry grass, making the platform look like an unfinished blanket wash. The wind was still cold, but no longer harsh. It exhaled now, rather than biting in. Alan still worked the night shift. The invitation from Chuck still sat in his jacket pocket, unanswered. He hadn't declined, but he hadn't accepted either. As if some part of him still needed proof that he was truly needed. That night, Alan had a feeling. Something was different. Not the weather, not the train schedule, but a silence that didn't feel natural. No one arrived early like usual. No passers-by. No footsteps in the corridor. Even the vending machine didn't make its usual water-filtering hum. He stepped outside, doing his usual check. Lamppost, rail ends. Then turned back toward the night room. Just as he reached the door, it opened. A man stepped in. Dark coat, knit cap, unfamiliar face. But the walk, nothing alarming. The man didn't speak immediately. He reached into his coat pocket and handed Alan a slip of paper. Yellow, military ek, note style, handwritten, clean and clipped. No name, no signature. 5 words. You're authorized, don't ask why. Alan stood still. Not out of fear, not out of shock, but he immediately understood. Years of medical service, time with military field units, emergency triage in conflict zones. He knew the type of directive this was. Orders are not sent from an office, but from higher, deeper, quieter places of authority. You're authorized. Meaning, someone opened a path within the system. Don't ask why. Meaning, all obstacles had already been cleared. No presentations. No signatures. No permits. No boards. Just action. The man nodded once and left without waiting for a reply. No thanks expected. Alan watched him go. The door closed without a sound. He sat down, still holding the note. And for the first time in many years, he didn't feel like he had to prove anything. The next morning, Alan called the one person he trusted to handle this right. Roy, an old carpenter in town, a former student from a community CPR class Alan had taught 15 years ago. "Roy," Alan said, voice calm, "I need your help to build something. No questions, no permits. We've got 3 days." Roy didn't ask. He just replied, "Do I need to bring the crane?" Alan chuckled, for the first time in weeks. "Just bring your heart, that's enough." Over the next 3 days at Elkhorn Station, they built a first aid outpost. Small, about the size of a restroom, but solid. Double-paned windows, AED unit, medical kit, radio link, oil heater, waterproof CPR instructions on the wall. No nameplate, no sponsor, no hospital logo, just one carved line on the oak doorframe. For the one who steps forward first. Rumors spread. Local reporters came asking. The station director looked baffled. The city asked who authorized it. But no one could find the paperwork. And no one dared dismantle it, because the station director himself had received an identical slip of paper. Except he said 5 different words. Do not obstruct. Do not ask. On completion day, Alan gave no speech. He just cleaned up, wiped his hands on his pants, and stepped back 3 paces. A group of school kids passed by. One boy stopped, read the carved line on the wood, and whispered to his friend. Who was the first to step forward? His friend replied, "Probably that man over there." Both looked at Alan. He looked back and smiled. Not a smile seeking praise. Just the smile of a man who knows he did the right thing. That night, back in the night room, Alan wrote 3 lines in his notebook. "I didn't ask who gave the order, but I know someone believes." And that is enough. 1 week after the outpost was completed, light snow fell again. Not the first snow of the season, but the last kind. The kind that feels like a memory returning after you'd forgotten what it meant to feel something. Alan sat in the night room, brewing coffee like always. That habit never changed, even though he knew most of the time no one drank it but him. The windows fogged. The sky turned steel grey. Outside, the platform lay empty. But in a quiet corner near the new outpost, a figure stood still, watching the window. The person wore a thick coat with a high collar pulled up to the chin. They didn't move for nearly 10 minutes. No smoking, no phone, no pacing. Alan saw them from inside, not startled, not worried. Yes, to start. Something stirred gently in his chest. Without really knowing why, he got up, put on his coat, and stepped outside. The cold wind slipped through his collar, but his chest grew warmer with each step. The man didn't turn around immediately. Only when Alan got close did their eyes meet. No one smiled. No one said a name. There was no, "Are you him?" No, "I remember you." Just recognition. In the gaze of 2 people who had once kept a life from slipping away by hanging on to one invisible thread. Belief. Chuck was the first to speak. His voice was soft, but not distant. "I didn't come to talk about gratitude. I just wanted to see if the outpost truly exists." Alan nodded, eyes steady. "It does, but not because of me." Chuck nodded slightly. "Because someone once held on to me without asking who I was. No activist, and I think a person like that deserves to see the world still needs people like him." No more words were needed. Chuck stepped forward and laid his hand gently on the wooden door. Then he reached into his chest pocket, pulling out a small object wrapped in a grey cloth. He placed it next to the laminated first aid guide inside the outpost. Alan stepped closer, looked at the item, a small blackened bronze pin, embossed with two interlocked hands. No text, no symbol, just one faint scratch on the corner, identical to a scalpel nick from an emergency surgery long ago. Alan stood in silence. Chuck didn't explain. He didn't need to. He simply said, "In the military, we call this the emblem for the unranked who changed outcomes. Most never receive it. But I believe you'll understand why it exists." Alan stared at it for a long time, then turned to look at Chuck as if to ask, "Why give this to me?" Chuck answered, "Because some people live their whole lives never being called heroes. But in the moment it matters, they don't step back." The outpost was empty at that hour, but if anyone had passed by, they would have seen two men, one with salt and pepper hair, one fully grey, standing inside a small wooden hut, looking at an object no larger than a palm. Yet their eyes carried the quiet weight of a history the world never wrote down. No one took pictures. No one signed anything. Chuck left in under 15 minutes. No farewell, no handshake. Just a single nod and a tap to the chest with his right hand, the way old special forces do when they recognize a fellow soldier who showed up without needing to be told. Alan returned to the night room. On the desk, beside his notebook, he placed the bronze emblem, resting between two blank pages. Then, with a hand trembling slightly, he wrote, "Someone knows, and I'm not invisible anymore." That evening, a passenger stopped by and asked, "Who built that little station over there?" Alan smiled without looking up. "Probably someone, whoa, didn't wait for permission to save a life." A week after the meeting at the station, a black SUV pulled up in front of Elkhorn Station just before dawn. The door didn't open right away. Eventually, a single person stepped out, wearing a plain vest and a name badge that read, "Kickstart Program Logistics Division." They said nothing. They simply handed Alan a sealed envelope. Inside was a brief itinerary with 3 lines. Pickup time, 5:00. Clock AM Thursday. Dress coat, comfortable, no lab coat. Note, you are not required to teach, only to be present. Alan packed lightly. A thick cotton shirt. His old navy coat was the one he used to wear during ICU shifts. No suitcase. No agenda. No PowerPoint slides. He didn't know where he was going. And strangely, he didn't need to. In some places you just go, because showing up is enough. As the vehicle turned into the Kickstart campus, Alan could feel it immediately. This wasn't a place of rigid protocols. This was a place of transformation. No electric fences, no guard towers, just low, warmly painted buildings nestled among pine trees. At the center stood a large wooden sign, carved with the words, "A room for those who were never asked, yet chose to do what's right." Alan stepped out of the car. He drew a deep breath. The air felt like a train station, not because of the architecture, but because nobody here knew where they were going. All carried hope with them. Chuck Norris was already waiting in the courtyard. No hat, no sunglasses, no bodyguards. Just a man walking toward another man. They didn't shake hands.
I nodded, like 2 soldiers who've already fought the same war and don't need to retell it. Yeah, they said, yeah, not to give lectures, not to lead a class, but to simply be. Alan asked quietly, "Who am I here?" Chuck smiled. "The one they go quiet for. When you begin to speak." They entered a small room, wooden floor, warm lights, no projector, just 20 high school students seated in a U shape. In front of each was a basic CPR dummy, some worksheets, and one empty chair. The chair was for Alan. No one introduced him. No bio was read. No, today we have a very special guest. Only one line was written on the whiteboard behind him. What will you do when no one else moves? Alan sat down, looked around. A girl with brown hair, seated in front, stared at him for a long time, then asked, "You're the man from the first aid station, aren't you? The one in Elkhorn?" Alan nodded. She continued, voice trembling. "My dad recorded video that night, but he didn't post it. As you said, this isn't about fame." The class went silent. Alan sniffled, but because he felt alive again. He didn't start with a lecture. He just told a story. "One time, I held a man's heart through the night. I didn't know his name. He didn't say a word, but he breathed again, and I walked away. No one knew. Only when he found me later did I understand. Some people we save don't owe us thanks. They just need to keep living so they can do what they were born to do." A student raised his hand, a boy, firm voice. "What if I'm scared? What if I'm not sure what I'm doing is right?" Evelyn answered, without hesitation. "A wrong action is better than no action when someone's dying." The only true mistake is standing still in silence. For the next hour, Alan didn't teach techniques. He led them to trust their instincts, how to listen to a breath. How do you say, "I'm here," and mean it? How not to flinch when life begins to fade. No one took notes. No one took selfies. Only presence. And the quiet focus of youth, hearing an old man speak of the one time he didn't step back even when no one had told him to step forward. The class ended without applause. No bell. Just soft nods, as if leaving a room where something sacred had happened, but no one had words for it. Them kids stayed, not to take pictures, not to ask for autographs, just to place a hand on Alan's shoulder, then walk away. A gesture no book could teach, and none needed to explain. After the class ended, Chuck walked into the room. In his hand was a blank white wooden panel resting on a small easel. He said, "We have a tradition here. Each person who has kept someone alive, not because it was their job, not because they wore a title, gets to write one sentence. Just one. No signature, no name. That sentence stays in this room for as long as it stands." Alan stared at the panel, silent, for a long while. Finally, he took the marker, and his hand, once unsteady after his dismissal, was now firm again. His writing wasn't elegant, but it was clear. The handwriting of someone who had signed prescriptions, death certificates, and stacks of unread files. He wrote, and didn't save to be remembered, "I just didn't want to be the one who stood still." "Chuck, read the words." I said nothing. He walked up, placed his hand gently on the final word, still, and held it there for a few seconds. Then, from his pocket, he took a tiny ebony nail and tapped it into the bottom corner of the board. Not to secure it, but to mark it. This board doesn't need replacing. That night, Alan didn't return to Elkhorn immediately. He sat outside under the overhang on a wooden bench. In his hands was a mug of hot ginger tea. In front of him was the open training yard where the kids had once practiced, now empty, lit only by warm light spilling from the windows. No one disturbed him. No one asked him to say more. He was simply present, like a small carving into silence. The next morning, before leaving, Chuck walked with Alan to the gate. No dramatic farewell. No thank you for coming. No see you again. Just a quiet touch. to Alan's arm. Chuck said, sometimes the only way to keep someone alive, it is to show them they still belong somewhere. Today, you did that for those kids. But more importantly, you did it for yourself. On the drive back to Elkhorn, Alan opened his notebook. On the very last page, still blank, he wrote a single, small line. If someone falls tomorrow, I'll still step forward. No one needed to read it. No one needed to achieve it. He just needed to remember that he once wrote it. 1 month later, the sentence Alan wrote was mounted permanently at the Kickstart Center. Under warm light, children, students, elders, and even a retired firefighter would visit that room. No one dared speak loudly there. No one dared erase his handwriting because they knew. A man lived his entire life just to be read when no one else dared move. Alan returned to Elkhorn on a quiet Sunday morning. No flaws. He carried an old canvas bag. Inside were 2 weathered medical books, a small flashlight, and the notebook, now half filled. No one knew he had just returned from a place where he was asked to write on the wall. No one knew he had once held the life of a legend in his arms. And Alan didn't need them to know. Everything at the station was the same. The old power pole still swayed in the wind. The digital board still flickered in the cold. The coffee machine still groaned by the 4th cup. Only one thing had changed. The small first aid outpost now had regular visitors. Adults came to check the diagram. Local students came to practice bandaging. An elderly woman occasionally left pastries at the doorstep, never with a name. Ellen knew it wasn't because people remembered him, but because they were beginning to remember what ought to be done, even when no one asked them to. One late afternoon, 2 boys came into the night room. Both wore backpacks and school athletic jackets. They looked at Alan and asked, "Are you a doctor?" Alan hesitated. "No," he said, then paused. "Mean, not anymore. I'm just the night guy now," the older boy replied. "But our dad said someone at the station once kept a person alive, even without an operating room. He said, if you want to learn how to be a decent man, go ask him." Alan was quiet. His heart clenched, not with pain, but as if someone had just placed a warm hand over a part of him he thought had gone numb. From that day on, Alan started doing things no one asked him to. He posted CPR instructions beside the vending machine. He placed a first aid kit inside the restroom. He kept a new notebook titled, "Those Who Stepped Forward First. Sign here if you like." No one told him to do it. No one acknowledged it. But within 2 weeks, nearly 30 names filled the pages. None were famous, but each had taken action when no one else dared. One snowy night, Chuck Norris returned for the last time. Or announcement. He didn't enter the night room. He simply stood afar, watching the outpost now lit by solar lights. He saw a boy helping his mom bandage a knee, saw a girl teaching her friend how to stay calm during a fainting spell, saw Alan not instructing, just observing. Then Chuck took out a small slip of paper, handwritten, "I have seen what I hoped for. The once silent man is now shaping language for those who were never taught how to step forward." He placed it on the stone bench beside the outposts. "No name need to be kept." And he left, as he once arrived. Exactly when he was needed, never more. One early April afternoon, a class of elementary students toured Elkhorn Station. They walked in pairs, gazing curiously at everything: the vending machines, the timetables, the weathered wooden benches. When they reached the first aid outpost, the teacher paused. A little girl asked, "Who built this little house, miss?" The teacher hesitated. There was no plaque, no donor wall. Curly-haired, wearing glasses, said, My dad said it was the man who kept people alive. Is a hero? Another asked.
I don't know, the teacher replied. But if he hadn't been here, maybe some people wouldn't be either. Alan stood at a distance. He heard it. He didn't step forward. He just tightened his sleeve and stood still in the shade of the old utility pole. Beneath his feet, the snow had melted. On his hands, fresh calluses. Not from holding scalpels anymore, but from opening first aid kits and cleaning small bloodstains that might just have saved a life. One stormy evening, Alan opened the notebook titled, "Those Who Stepped Forward First." On the last page was a new, scrawled entry, written in a child's handwriting. "I've never saved anyone, but if it ever happens, I want to be like you." Beneath that, a drawing of a cat as a signature. Alan chuckled. A quiet laugh. Not proud, not dramatic, just grateful. Years later, Elkhorn Station was upgraded. New digital boards, LED lighting, a modern info center near the old first aid outpost. At the ribbon cutting, no one mentioned Alan, but when a child fell on the platform and a teenager rushed over, checking for a pulse, and said 3 calm sentences. "I'm here. Breathe deep. I'll hold on to you." Everyone turned toward the outpost. No one said a name, but everyone looked in the same direction. Alan passed away on a winter day many years later. No obituary, just a short post from Kickstart's account. "We've just lost the first man who ever wrote on the white wall, the one who didn't need to be known to start others moving. It stepped forward like he once did." That day, at Elkhorn Station, a child walked past the outpost. She sat quietly on the wooden steps, not knowing why. She'd never met Alan, but she'd heard stories. From her backpack she pulled out a piece of paper, wrote 1 sentence, and placed it beneath a stone beside the door. "I don't know what to do yet, but if someone falls, I won't stand still." End of story. Some people, when alive, no one notices. But when they're gone, they leave behind a space that an entire generation grows into, to learn how to step forward.